I was tagged to do this tag, and I am really looking forward to doing it because I wanted to last year when it was popular on the booktube. Was it last spring? Yes. And I didn't do it then, but then I was tagged, and I was tagged by Michael, and his channel is called Bitten by a Radioactive Book. That is such a cool name for a channel. And I'm going to link his video in the description below so you can check it out, and I'm also going to link the original video in the description box. In this tag you have to tell your top 10 most influential books, so 10 books that had the most influence on you, and you have to tell all those books without explaining much. Only list them or say only a few sentences. And I'm going to do the second thing, so I'm going to tell you a bit about them, but not too much. My first influential book is any book from The Famous Five by Bitten, and I'm not sure how many people read those books around the world, but they were really popular here in Serbia, and this is the version that I read. This is one of the books, and I have no idea where the other books are, because I had almost all of them, and I have no idea where they are now. But this is the book, and this book was read to me by my mother and my grandmother, because they're the ones who taught me that reading is cool, and they used to read to me. So this is one of the books that they read to me, like a bedtime story or something like that. And I really enjoyed all these books, and after that I read them when I started reading by myself, and this is my first influential book. That was more than few sentences, but moving on. Of course, the next one has to be Harry Potter, and this is the book that I read, and this is one of my most influential books because this is the first book that I read by myself. I think that it was, yes. And then Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was also the first book that I read in English, so this is a double influential book, but I'm going to put it on the second place, and it is going to take only one place because I have more books to show you. The next one has to be Lord of the Rings. This is the book that I read, and after that I read them in English also, and I was so into magic and fantasy and things like that after reading Harry Potter that I just have to read Lord of the Rings, and my grandmother also read it and she also enjoyed it, so Lord of the Rings. And then, because not a lot of books like that were published in Serbia at the time, and I had to read what was published, and I know that this one is not really appropriate to be read by a 12-year-old girl, but I read Game of Thrones when I was 12, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm not sorry about that. And I read the first book and the second book because those two books were published at the time, and then I stopped reading them, and after the show came out I read the third book, and now I have fourth and fifth book to read, so Game of Thrones. The book that really got me into reading in English, and the series that got me into reading in English, is the Saga of Darren Shan, and those books were the first vampire books I read, so they also taught me to love vampires, because vampires are my favorite supernatural beings. So this is the second book. I've mentioned in one of my videos that I gave the first book to a friend and he never returned it, so this is the second book, and I had the third one, and the fourth one didn't come out in Serbia, and I really wanted to read it and to find out what would happen next, so I bought that book in English, and that was the first book that I read in English without having read it in Serbian before. So that is one of my most influential books. After that I have to mention Pellinor by Alison Croghan. I couldn't really find it now, but I'm going to insert the picture here. And this is the first book that I read in English without having read the first book of the series in Serbian, if that makes any sense. So that is also one of my most influential books. And then after that, I really have to mention the Black Magician trilogy, because this is one of my all-time favorite trilogies by Trudy Canavan. And I read the first book in Serbian, then the second two in English. And I really love this trilogy, and I read it so many times. I don't even know. I think that I read this trilogy 10 times or something like that. And I'm going to read it again and again, because there is something in this trilogy that I really liked. And I learned many new words from this trilogy when I read it in English, so it had to be on this list. Then the book that got me into young adult genre, and I really have to mention this one, is Twilight, because I already loved vampires because of Darren Shan and things like that, and I really enjoyed this book. And I read it when only the first and the second books were out, and then I waited for the third one and the fourth one, and I really enjoyed the series until the fourth book came out, and then I was really disappointed, but I still do love and appreciate the series. I really loved it at the time, and it introduced the young adult genre to me, so it has to be on this list. And I'm going to reread it soon and to find out how I feel about it now, because I think that is something I should really do. Then after that, I really have to mention this one, because I love this author. This is my favorite fantasy author, and that is Jennifer Fallon. And the first book by Jennifer Fallon that I've ever read was Madeline, and this is the first book in the Demon Child trilogy. But I also have to say that this is probably my least favorite of all her books, because the first half of the book is really full of cliches and things like that, but it starts getting better, and the second book and the third book are really great, so you should definitely check this one out. I really love all her trilogies, series, everything, and I've read almost all of them, so this one had to be put on the list. And at last, I have the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, and those three were the first books by Brandon Sanderson that I read and really enjoyed. So this one is the second book, and I had to show you this one because I don't really like the cover of the first one that I have. So the first one I have in Serbian, the second two in English, and those books introduced me into Brandon Sanderson's work, and he is also one of my favorite fantasy writers, so I had to include this book as well. That would be my top 10 most influential books that I wanted to show you, and I really hope that you enjoyed me doing this tag, and if you did, press the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in some of my next videos.